now start talking about Bitcoin as a currency. Okay? Right? I've set up that Bitcoin is supposed to be a currency, not so clear it is a currency. What are the problems? What are the opportunities? Will it ever be a currency? Okay, so the question for this whole topic is Bitcoin a currency or can it be a currency? Okay, here's an interesting historical fact. In 2010, somebody called Laszlo Haniec, I think I got that right, offered to buy $27 worth of pizza with Bitcoin. So Laszlo Haniec, this was in Florida, in the States. Laszlo Haniec was, I think, a software engineer. He was probably an early miner of Bitcoins. In those days, anybody could mine Bitcoins. So he was probably an early miner of Bitcoins. So he had some Bitcoins. He wanted to establish that Bitcoins could be used in transactions. There wasn't established exchange rate at the time, which we'll get to in a minute. So he offered to buy pizzas with Bitcoins on a one-to-one basis, and he tried for several days to get somebody to take his Bitcoins and give him pizza. In the end, Papa John is a chain of pizza sellers in the US and probably elsewhere as well. Papa John eventually did agree to sell a pizza, but they took a premium. They took what was then $42 worth of Bitcoins. So they made a profit already, right? They made a $15 worth of profit on their Bitcoin transaction, even on the day they made it. So this is exciting. This is the first transaction using Bitcoins that we know about. Okay, so this 2010 is quite early, right? Remember, the white paper is only the end of 2008, so it's about a year after Bitcoin was really started. It's quite early on in the Bitcoin world. And so this is the first transaction. So $42 worth of Bitcoins. How many Bitcoins was that? It was 10,000 Bitcoins. So you can do some sums to work out how much a single Bitcoin was worth, but I'm not going to do that in my head. But as I write, those 10,000 Bitcoins, well, as I wrote this, those 10,000 Bitcoins were worth about $580 million. As I speak to you, those 10,000 Bitcoins are worth about $410 million, or maybe even $390 million, depending on, in the last couple of days, there's been a lot of going back and forth over 40. So there's a lot to be said here. So the fact that I wrote this slide not long ago and it's $580 million and it's now $410 or so million shows you that as a store value, it's not perfect. But had Papa John's decided to keep those Bitcoins, instead of making a $15 profit, they would have made a $500 million profit, okay? Which, is pretty good. The date of that transaction was May the 22nd, 2010. It's known in the Bitcoin world as Pizza Day. So May the 22nd is Pizza Day because it's the anniversary of the first Bitcoin real world transaction. So that was the first purchase made with Bitcoins. It's pretty much the last, except I think unless you count black market sort of transactions of their sort. So let's keep those off and just say, well, it's not really a lot of pizzas being bought with Bitcoins. And it's not really true anyway. I mean, I think there are some places where, as a kind of gimmick, you can buy coffee with Bitcoins, with tiny Satoshis. Anyway, never mind about that. The point is it's not really taken off. I can't, as a general rule, ask Papa John to give me a pizza for my Bitcoins, right? Okay? So, big takeaway from this, and there's no pun meant about taking away pizzas, Bitcoin has been more successful as a store of value than as a currency. There's no question about it. It's been a very successful store of value. The fact that there's $42 worth of Bitcoins are now worth about $500 million, $40 million, something like that. And it's only, it's however long ago that was, it's not that long ago, right? So, 11 years. So it's quite an investment, right? Quite a store of value. Not such a great currency. But, when I first started getting interested in Bitcoin, people were saying, as soon as it takes off as a currency, that's when the value is going to rise. So that's interesting, because in a way, as I said before, they work against each other, these two things. So the intention was never to be a store of value. Having said that, when you hear people who do speak bullishly of Bitcoins, they frequently do point out something that's very, very systematic about this, in that Bitcoins are deflationary. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins. And in fact, there will never even be 21 million Bitcoins, because some have been lost and they'll never be found. So there's probably fewer than 20 million Bitcoins, really. But let's go with it, 20 million Bitcoins. Now, nobody is in a position, nobody ever will say, hey, you know what? I'm a bit worried about the economy. I'm going to make some more Bitcoin. The way we have after the financial crisis in 2008, as we have after the pandemic, we have quantitative easing, we have all kinds of ways people are going to print more money, dollars, pounds, what have you. Those when you print more dollars, you lower the value of each dollar. Nobody's doing that with Bitcoin, and that's one of the things that people are bullish about, and that is the kind of thing about it as a currency, I guess, or it's certainly in the way it's set up, right? Okay, but never mind about that. We're going back to the question of currency, not store of value. Okay, so what are some of the obstacles to Bitcoin as a currency? When I've talked about this before, I've said earlier in the introduction to this topic, for example, I said, well, this is set up so we would have a really fast way of exchanging money. We don't need this go through these banks and these credit card agencies, etc., etc. It'd be really fast. Well, is it really fast? We'll see. Well, we'll talk about that. And no, it isn't. As set up, and why not? Well, we'll talk about that. First of all, the number of transactions is a problem. There's only a limited number of transactions that can find their way onto the blockchain. The blocks only come out about every 10 minutes, and when I say about, we now know that about is an interesting about, but let's say every 10 minutes. And they don't have that many transactions on them, so there's not that many transactions that can be done in 10 minutes. And remember, we've seen Bitcoin Cash deal with that by making the blocks bigger. That was our example of a hard fork, right? Now, the speed of transactions is what I started talking about before. Now, why is the speed a real issue here? Well, because if you have to wait for your transaction to get onto the blockchain, you have to wait at least, it might be very quick, but it might be a long time. Even if you're waiting for the next block, you expect to wait 10 minutes, you might wait 20 minutes, you might wait 30 minutes, but you might not even have your transaction on the next block. So the example people frequently use about what they really want to be able to do is buy a chocolate bar in a vending machine. I think this has something to do with the kind of people who are interested in Bitcoins. The kind of people interested in Bitcoins want to buy a chocolate bar in a vending machine. That's just the way it is. So if you want to buy a chocolate bar at a vending machine, you probably, if it's a Bitcoin-y thing, it's probably got a QR code. You use the QR code, it goes to your wallet, all lovely. And then you wait for the next block. And not on the next block, you wait for the next block. etc. And if you're really careful, lots of people, most people will wait 6 blocks before they actually accept a transaction because they're worried about the blockchain changing shape, right? Right, reorgs, that's what I'm trying to think of. They're worried about a reorg. So if you're buying a chocolate bar and you have to wait 6 blocks before your chocolate bar comes, you're going to lose all the advantages of a fast vending machine. So we will see how to get around that. The way we're going to get around that is, as I said in the introduction, I think we're going to use Lightning. And Lightning, well, I'm not going to spoil where we're going to get to. Lightning will help us do this, or in fact, something it's called a transaction. Never mind, a transaction channel will do this, but we will get into that in the next couple of lectures. So that's it. We're going to do something that can speed up transactions and make us have more transactions than we now can without making larger blocks. We have another way of doing this, and that's where we're heading for in these lectures. So that's the technical questions. We're going to also talk at the end of the topic about less technical questions. One of the things that you'll hear a lot about is the environmental impact. Okay, when I first made these lines, the first time I recorded this, and it's gone wrong, so I'm re-recording it. The first time I recorded this, you could buy a Tesla with Bitcoins. Now, you can't, I think, or at least Elon Musk has tweeted that he's going to stop you from doing it, and it's all because of the environmental impact. It suddenly occurred to him that the environmental impact of Bitcoins is actually pretty severe. Okay, and so people worry about the environmental impact. We're going to talk about that some more. And people talk about geopolitical concerns. I mean, are Bitcoin miners people who are sitting around at home and around all over the world, hacker boys doing their, oh gosh, that was a great sexist, hacker boys and girls doing their laptops? No, it's not like that anymore. And so there's a lot of power around Bitcoin that's now centralized. It's now centered around big big miners of Bitcoins, blocks, and they tend to be in China. And is that a problem? For some people it will be, for some people it won't be. So that's another sort of concern. Are we concerned about that kind of power being so concentrated? If Bitcoin were to become the standard unit of currency, which is something that some people, I was going to say many people, but probably not many people, but some people think is going to happen, is that a problem where the miners are? Okay, so all of these kinds of concerns come in. We will talk about how to solve 1 and 2. We'll talk more detail about 3 at the end of this topic. Okay, so the next lecture is the beginning of solving the problems about number of transactions and speed of transactions. In particular, it's going to tell you how you can get your chocolate bar, or how Alice can get her loaf of bread. Okay, so see you there. We're on our way to making Bitcoins into a currency. Very exciting. See you in the next lecture. Okay, we've talked about problems with Bitcoin becoming a much-used currency. And one of them is speed, and one of them was just the number of transactions. We talked about Bitcoin Cash at one time being a way to at least get some of that problem by just making that block size 8 meg instead of 1 meg, right? Remember that. So that's one way to allow more transactions. Doesn't necessarily allow more speed, but it allows more transactions. So in this topic, we're going to look at ways of doing both. Okay, we're going to start with the simplest way to do this, which is called zero confirmation transactions. So zero confirmation transactions are just transactions that don't get confirmed. Quite the simplest thing you can think of. Remember, I'm just saying again, these are the obstacles I'm trying to get away from, being too slow and too few transactions. And the slowness comes from the fact of waiting to get on the blockchain. So we go to the chocolate vending machine, chocolate vending machine, okay? Here's the idea. I choose a chocolate, I give it with the Bitcoin wallet that it's going to come from, probably with a QR code. And the machine broadcasts to the whole network that that's what I'm going to do. The machine broadcasts to the network that this wallet is going to pay for this chocolate from this using some transaction, unspent transaction output. I get my chocolate bar. Notice I'm not on this transaction is not on the blockchain, but it has been it has been broadcast to the network. The network knows about it, but we haven't got around to putting it on the blockchain. So we're not going to wait for the transaction to get on the block. By the time the transaction does get on the block, I've probably finished my chocolate bar. I might even have had another chocolate bar by then. Could take a while to get it on the block, but this seems not to be too much of a problem, largely because it's not very much money. So it's pretty safe for small transactions. There's not really an incentive for the miners not to put the transaction on the chain. Or is there? We'll see later. That changes, actually. But on the face of it, you might think there's no incentive. So what has this done for us? It gives us quick transactions. Why are they quick? We no longer have to wait for the blockchain. It doesn't solve the number of transaction problems. They still eventually have to get on the blockchain. So it doesn't actually open up to have more transactions. However, there's controversy around it. There is always controversy around this idea. There's a small chance of the transaction not working. So you've got your chocolate bar and the vending machine doesn't get its money. The vending machine is probably not going to come and strangle you in the night, but it's only because, not because it's a vending machine, but because it's not very much money. So there's a small chance of the transaction not working, but that's true when you play with a credit card as well. That's not new. And it's not really clear that double spending isn't the problem here. You could quickly buy a chocolate bar and a Diet Coke. Possibly. Anyway, some people say yes, some people say the trade cards are in place for that. So it's quite controversial. And there's just other people who are quite purists who say this is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is about having things verified and on the blockchain. Otherwise, if we don't have that, what are we? It's just chaos. Okay, and then this is controversial until 2016, but what happened in 2016? Something else got brought into Bitcoin with a soft fork, and that's something called the replace by fee transactions, and that allowed people to replace a transaction with another one with a higher fee that spends the same outputs, and that counts as the original transaction. That's not after it's been on the block, but if it's after it's been broadcast. Well, this obviously ends zero confirmation transactions. If I can't be sure nobody's going to do this, I'm not going to give you a chocolate bar. Go away. Okay? Bitcoin Cash, that's what PCH is. Bitcoin Cash, which we've learned about before, does have zero confirmation transactions, and the price they pay is they don't have replaced by fee transactions. So Bitcoin Cash is gone, stays with, you actually can have zero confirmation transactions, but you don't have replaced by fee transactions. Bitcoin has replaced by fee transactions, so it can't have the zero confirmation transactions. However, we still have this lingering desire. Wouldn't it be nice to have a way of accepting transactions without waiting to put in the block? So we could have day-to-day transactions. And wouldn't it be nice to have the transactions somehow without them all getting on the block? So maybe if we can get on the blockchain, the block should say blockchain, limiting the number of transactions on the blockchain would be helpful too, because why? Because we can then have more transactions, because if there are transactions that don't have to get on the blockchain, then we can have more transactions overall. In the rest of this, most of this topic, I think we're going to be a little bit up to it, but in the next 3 lectures, we'll look at an interesting series of, we're going to build this up over 3 lectures and three steps, I guess. And the proposal, the solution I'm going to tell you about is called Lightning. It's been around for a few years. And we'll talk about that more. So we're going to build our way up to that. Okay, so in the first lecture, we're going to talk about how you make channels where people can have transactions off of the chain, so we sometimes call those off-chain reactions. I have a lot of trouble not saying chain reaction. Off-chain transactions. So we can have off-chain transactions in a safe way, so we can have lots of transactions that actually don't ever find their way onto the blockchain, but end up being part of how the money gets exchanged. So channels in the next lecture. See you at the channels. Okay, I promised you that we were going to find a way of having safe transactions and not put them all on the blockchain. That's our goal, and we're going to build this up in 3 lectures, I think. And the first one of these is about channels, and you think of a channel kind of as a pipe or something where going in, that's something that the blockchain knows about. Coming out, the blockchain needs to go about. But what happens in between is hidden from the blockchain. That's kind of what's going on. So let's see how that can work and how we can do that. That's safe. That's the key. And it is pretty clever stuff. Be ready for some clever stuff. Right. Okay. So what could be cleverer than this? Bob's a baker. Okay, you can see it's already getting complicated. Bob's a baker. Alice is an acquirer of bread. See what I did there? So Bob's a baker, Alice is an acquirer of bread. Alice wants to pay Bob for bread, 1 loaf at a time. She's going to give him lots of money for lots of loaves. Loaves cost a Bitcoin each. Okay, very expensive bread, but bear with me here. Alice wants to be in a position to buy 10 of these easily. That's the point. But but she's not going to hand over all her money to Bob. She's not giving Bob 10 Bitcoins and say, "I'll have bread every day for 10 days, please." She doesn't trust Bob that much. So there's always this clever cryptography and clever ways of avoiding trusting people, right? Nobody trusts each other. Okay, before we do this, I need to say a couple of things about what transactions look like. First, transactions have a lock time field. This is true of all transactions, but mostly of 0, which means it doesn't come into effect. This allows us, on the other hand, sometimes to say, this isn't good till such and such a time, and there's two ways of saying what the time is. Well, there's more than two now, but there's two absolute ways of saying it. One is to say the number of seconds since Unix began or something. That's January 1970. Anyway, that sounds about right. So the number of seconds, or the other way is you could talk about number of blocks, block heights. So there's two ways of talking about time. But I don't care about that. So there's a locked time, okay? Transactions have a locked time field. So we can refer to when this transaction can begin. That's what we need, okay? And the other thing is PK scripts can be much more complicated than the ones we saw in topic 4. So remember the ones in topic 4 were just, we went through this script with, which worked out, played around with a stack and just made sure that the person you were sending it to was the right person. You could make sure of more than that, and it could be more complicated than that. One of the things it can have is more than one signature, and it can have combinations saying 2 of 5 signatures or 3 of 6 signatures or something. But the ones we're going to talk about are just going to be 2 of 2. So you can require more than one signature, and for what we're doing, we're going to need 2 signatures sometimes. Okay, so you can require more than one signature. You can want both of the 2 signatures, for example, is what we're going to be doing. And there's all kinds of reasons this might be useful. We're going to see some today. Okay, and another thing is that PK scripts they're not full programming languages, but they do have conditionals. They have if statements. So you can, for example, have outputs that are available to signatories only under certain conditions. So you can say, if such a condition holds, then do this stuff, put this stuff in, and if all that works, then give this person this money. Okay, so you can have if statements, you can have more than one signature. We need both of those here. Okay, so now, that's an aside. Here's the general idea of what we're going to do. Alice wants to give Bob money for each loaf of bread, but nobody wants to bother waiting to get on the blockchain. So she'll create a series of transactions spending the same transaction output. And the first one of them will send 1 Bitcoin to Bob and 9 to Alice. And that will pay for 1 loaf of bread, right? And she signs it and gives it to Bob. Bob can cash that in. He can broadcast it onto the network. But he doesn't, because he's expecting a second one, and he's expecting the second one to give him 2 and Alice 8. Okay? It's better for Bob. So he's lucky for him he didn't cash in the first one. So you can throw away the first one because he can't use both, because you can't use the same unspent output twice, right? So once he's got the second one, he can throw away the first. But remember, and they can keep going until they run out of coins and have all the bread they want, or what have you, and that's all fine. Except remember, they don't trust each other. So what's the trust issue here? Where is the trust issue? Does Alice have a trust issue at this point? No, I don't think so, because Bob may transfer the first one in, and then maybe Alice can't get any more bread, but that's life. It's not that she hasn't been swindled. She needs a new channel if she's going to get bread. But that's all. The worst thing can happen to Alice at this point. So she doesn't have a trust problem. She's fine. What about Bob? Has he got something to worry about? Well, he's got first the transaction that gives him 1 Bitcoin in the bank, and he's got one that gives him 2, that's 3. He's sitting pretty, isn't he? However, how does he know that Alice won't spend the UTXO while he's waiting to spend it, right? Alice might decide she's going to buy bread someplace else, with that same UTXO, or even a Tesla. You know, she might buy anything with that UTXO, and then Bob's got a useless transaction. So that's not going to help. So we need a way to stop that. So we need to lock that UTXO. We need to lock the transaction output, so that Alice can't spend it while all this maneuvering is going on. So we need a way of locking that. So we do that with what's called a funding transaction. So it takes the UTXO of 10 Bitcoins that we're going to use to fund the channel, and we make a transaction that both Alice and Bob need to sign. Okay? So Alice can't now spend it someplace else without Bob's permission. So, okay, so Alice is now in the position where she can't spend it. So Bob's now happier, right? Bob can say, okay, now that's pretty good. Life is good here. I've got these series of transactions coming my way, and Alice, whatever is in her wicked heart, she can't do anything about it because she can't spend that transaction that we see here. Goes on the blockchain. I should probably say that. I should have a slide. I'll write it on what I print out. She takes the blockchain. She puts it. That gets on the blockchain. So everybody knows about this transaction. It's not spent yet, but everybody knows about this transaction. That means Alice cannot spend this output on anything else. It's no longer in the pool of unspent outputs. It's now in that transaction, right? So, and Alice and Bob need to spend it, so to sign it. So Alice can't take it back. Alice can't do anything at the moment with this transaction. So Bob's free and easy. He knows he's going to get this series of transactions. He knows Alice can't take the money. No problem in the world. But what about Alice? Alice is bloody exposed here, because look what's happened. She's now taken 10 Bitcoins and she's put it in a position where she can't spend them. So, and she doesn't trust Bob. Well, I mean, even if she did trust Bob, I did say it gets put on the blockchain. There we go. Okay, so the funding, I've got quite ahead of myself here. The funding transaction locks Alice's unspent transaction. She can't access it without Bob's signature. So Bob's safe. But what about Alice? You've had a hint already. I've already told you that Alice is bloody exposed here. What about Alice? Well, Bob can maliciously just stop Alice from having her money, right? Or he could just get hit by a bus. In the other case, the situation is the same. Alice has put 10 Bitcoins on UTXO that she can't undo. On a transaction she can't undo. She's lost those 10 Bitcoins. Okay, so this isn't good. We need to do something about that. You won't be surprised that the answer to this is yet another transaction. It's called a refund can't think of the other word. Okay, so we'll call it a refund transaction. The other one comes up in this slide. Okay, Bob signs another transaction that gives all the money to Alice. Okay, well, if that's all the transaction did, well, Bob be in trouble, because after 3 days and he's got his 3 Bitcoins in that transaction, Alice has this transaction and she could just take it. So this would be great for Alice, but not so good for Bob, right? So this can't be the whole answer, right? And of course it's not. This transaction is time locked. That means nobody can use it. Even though it's signed, Alice can't actually spend that unspent transaction for 2 weeks. The 2 weeks gives you enough time to buy bread once a day plus a little buffer. Okay? So what's happening now? So Bob signed a transaction saying, Alice, you can have all the money in 2 weeks' time. Obviously, it's an absolute 2 weeks at this point. Okay, so if Bob disappears, what happens? Alice gets her money back. It just wait 2 weeks, but she gets her money back. The intention of this refund transaction is it never gets used. It only gets used under bad circumstances. But it stays in Alice's pocket, not broadcast. Okay, so Alice has it. She can use it if necessary. It's unlikely she'll have to use it, but she might. I mean, if Bob disappears, she'll have to. Okay? So Bob is safe, Alice is safe, everybody's safe. But we haven't yet bought any bread. But now Alice can buy bread. Commitment transaction, that's what I was trying to think of. Okay, Alice makes a commitment transaction and signs it. This spends the output of the funding transaction. This gives 9 coins to Alice and 1 to Bob. Alice gets her bread. Bob gets he doesn't get his Bitcoin. He now owns the output of a transaction that gives him 1 Bitcoin. But he's not going to cash it in, and he's not going to broadcast it to anybody. He keeps it. He's got this, and the reason he keeps it is he's waiting for a second one. Okay? We talked about this at the beginning of this lecture. Alice makes a second commitment transaction and signs it. This suspends the output of the funding transaction again, but this time it gives 8 coins to Alice and 2 to Bob, right? So again, Bob can throw away the other one. This is still waiting for Bob's signature, and if Bob broadcasts the previous transaction, this one wouldn't work. So luckily, Bob, he didn't broadcast the last one, otherwise he'd be out of luck here. So, and he doesn't broadcast this one on. He's waiting for so on until something happens, like they've run out of money, or he knows something. We've had enough of this channel, and eventually Bob broadcasts the last transaction in the series, or the best transaction. There might be transactions that get worse, and we'll talk about that in the next lecture. But he broadcasts the best transaction for him, okay, which, in the way I was going, is the last. And this gives him the money in that transaction. It uses the output from the funding transaction. It makes the refunding transaction useless, right? At this point, that transaction that Alice had, that after 2 weeks would give her the money, is no longer of any use at all. But he has to do this before the refund transaction is ripe. If he waits more than 2 weeks, Alice would have taken the money. So he's got to do this within the 2 weeks. He's got to choose one of these transactions, his commitment transactions to actually use, and he'll use the one that's best for him. And this closes the channel. That's the end of the channel. If Alice wants to buy more bread in this sort of way, she has to open a new channel. What have we accomplished? Well, Bob gets his money, Alice gets her bread. That's a good accomplishment. It's quick. Each of those transactions was absolutely quick. Nobody had to wait for blocks to be mined. It's just quick. It increased the possible number of transactions we have. Why? Because we had 10 transactions in here that never went onto the block, the chain. I'm saying block instead of chain. It's 10 transactions here that never went onto the blockchain. So we've seen 12 transactions just now. 10 of them didn't go on the blockchain. In the real world, you'd see hundreds of things that don't go on the blockchain. You wouldn't see them on the blockchain, but they get done. So here we've got a lot of transactions that can be done without having the limitations of what can go on the blockchain. So what are the limitations of this? Well, we have achieved some things, but we haven't achieved everything. The channel is only temporary. The channel is only one way. Why is the channel one way? Well, suppose Bob wants to give money back to Alice. Alice has now given him 3 coins and of the 10. Bob wants to give it back. So what's he going to do? He can say, okay, I'll make another one, which I'll give you, I'll only take 2 coins and I'll give you 8. Well, that would be giving money back, except I've still got the one, Bob, even though he gave you that one, he still has the one which gave him 3. He might tell you that he's going to not use it, but do you believe Bob? Nobody believes anybody. So, Alice and Bob are good friends. But even so, Alice and Bob don't believe each other. Once that Bob took up being a baker, he's no longer the trustworthy guy he once was. So that's not going to work. There's no way of going backwards. There's only one way. Alice can give money to Bob. Bob can't give money to Alice in this channel. And the channel only works for Alice and Bob, right? I mean, we need a new channel for every pair of people. So these are serious limitations. Though, you have to admit, it's pretty clever. Pretty clever. And it does do a lot of good. We're going to see in the next couple of lectures something even cleverer that takes care of these limitations. It's based on the same idea, though. Okay, and that's called lightning. Is the name for the whole network of thing, where we're going to actually get in the point where we can transfer money through a chain of people. Getting out of myself, but the first part of the next link in our chain of argumentation here is to get rid of this idea that it's one way by being able to, what's called revoke transactions. So remember I said Bob can give Alice one back by saying, here's a new transaction that's got 2 and 8 instead of 3 and 7. Well, and Alice says, no way, because I used to have this other one. But we're going to find out a way that we can make the other one null and void so that this will work. And that's the subject of the next lecture, revocable transactions. Revoking means taking away, taking back. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to take back transactions under some conditions in the next lecture. And that's even cleverer than this. This is a clever topic. Okay, see you in the next lecture. Revoking. Remember, next lecture is revoking. Okay, we've seen about channels now. Channels allow Alice and Bob to have transactions without putting them on the blockchain. So it's quick, right? Alice can send Bob money, Bob can send Alice bread, not through the channel, but however he sends her bread. This can happen in real time, more or less. So this is very quick. So that's all good, but we haven't solved all the problems. It is, in fact, we've solved lots of problems, so let's pat ourselves on the back, but we haven't solved all the problems. What problems haven't we solved? Well, Alice could send money to Bob, Bob can't send money back to Alice, and we'll explain that in a minute. And also, we have to close the channel to get money out. So it's not perfect by any means, but it's a step in the right direction. In this lecture and the next one, we're going to build on that. And we're going to tell you something that's called the Lightning Network. It comes out of MIT. And it's a very clever way of solving all these problems. And you can then have transactions both directions. And in fact, we're even going to see in the next lecture how you can have a network of channels where you can have transactions happening quite quickly without having a channel, a direct channel between the recipient and the giver. Okay. So I'm getting ahead of myself. First thing we're going to learn is we're going to remind you what the limitations are of these payment channels, and then we're going to start learning about Lightning. This lecture is about the idea that makes Lightning work, which is called revocation. So this lecture is about revocation. It's a lovely word, lightning. Lightning 1, really. The story begins, revocation. So we've talked about payment channels. We still need a permanent one. It would be still good to have a permanent one because it would still be good to have it. It would be even more important, I think, to have channels that you can transfer money in both directions. And you want connections that go beyond the two people who happen to be on the channel. Okay? So we talk a little bit about each of those things. The permanence of channels, well, we can't keep the channel open beyond the time of the refund transaction. So once to get the money out, we need you to close the channel. Once all the money is transferred, there's no reason to be open. It's got to do with the one-way notion. You cannot actually get your money out without closing the channel. So for all these reasons, the channel is just a temporary thing. What do I mean about it being one way? Well, once Alice has sent Bob 7 bitcoins, Bob cannot send any back. 7's not a magic number here, but whatever Alice has sent, Bob can't send them back. Why not? Well, you might think, okay, that's not so hard. Bob can make a new transaction in which Alice gets six of the coins, and Alice gets 4 of the coins, and Bob gets 6. Aha! Look, there we go. I've gone from 7-3 to 6-4. I've solved you my problem. What are you on about? Well. He still has in his back pocket that 731. He can still broadcast it when Alice isn't looking. Remember, the trust doesn't come into any of this. So Alice won't allow this because Bob can still at any time broadcast his 731. So because of that, once Bob's got 7, that's it. You know, he can't give any back. I mean, once we've got 8, he can't give any back. It's just whatever number he's got. That's it. They're not going in the other direction. New idea. What if Alice promises, crosses her heart and hopes to die, never to broadcast the 7-3 transaction? I thought I amended all those 7-3s to 7-3s. Okay, the 7-3 transaction. Remember, there's no trust here. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a mechanism that stops her from doing that. We're going to remember that we're going to stop anybody broadcasting a transaction. That's where the word revoke comes from. Okay? We're going to call this revocation. We're going to revoke a transaction, which means nobody can, once it's revoked, nobody's in a position really to broadcast it. So here's the idea. Revoking is a word that means taking back. So you're going to take back your transaction. So Alice, with Bob's help, makes the original transaction not usable. She needs Bob's help. I mean, if people could just go around revoking their transactions willy-nilly, then we're in trouble, right? So she needs Bob's say-so to be able to do this. But once Bob gives us a say-so, there's going to be a mechanism to stop Bob from taking that back. Okay, so Bob and Alice can revoke the 7-3 transaction, replace it with a 6-4 one, and in that way, Bob's giving back 1 of the Bitcoin. So we have 2-way transactions, right? Okay. So the first bit of this revocation, and is to do with the timing. Okay, we're looking at the PK script. So that's the bit that Alice uses to say who can spend the transaction output, right? And it says this. It says that somebody can spend the output of the transaction if he can prove that he's Bob. Well, we've had that before. That's normal. But there's an extra condition. The extra condition is this transaction was put on the chain at least 1 day ago. So there's a delay. Right. Now, this is different from the delays we had before. Before we talked about delaying whole transactions. We're not delaying the transaction, we're just delaying the spending of the output from this transaction. So it's a kind of relative thing. You always have the transactions. You always have a day before you can spend it once it's on the chain. Okay. Now the point of this day's grace is it gives Alice time to revoke the transaction if she wants and is able to. Got that? So that day is going to give Alice time to revoke her transaction. So how does she do that? As I say, she needs Bob's, Bob is part of this. So, okay, this is the comment is that people have a very long memory in pop music. You remember melody? You have a brand new kind of transaction. I have a brand new key. So we're going to have a brand new key here. Bob makes a new key. We've had keys before. We've had secret keys. We've had public keys. We've had, I don't know, this key, that key. We've now got a new key called a revocation key. And I'm going to call this revocation key Bob R1. I'm going to call it that because it's not the only revocation key Bob's going to have. It's the first one we're going to see. Because it's a revocation key for this transaction. It's not a revocation key for Bob's whole life. It's a revocation key that works for one transaction and one transaction only. And Alice is going to amend her PK script to include the following behavior so that somebody can spend the money if she can prove she's Alice. Alice can spend the money as well. Remember, Bob can spend the money after a day. Alice can spend the money. Does she have to wait a day? No, she doesn't have to wait a day, but she has to prove she has Bob's revocation key. How do you prove you have Bob's revocation key? Well, you should know this, but like the back of your hand now. She shows that she has something which, when she hashes it, comes out to be the published hash of the Bob's revocation key. Right. So that's how she proves she has Bob's revocation key. People are always proving things using hash functions. Right, okay. So let me reiterate this. Alice has made a transaction to send money to Bob. There are two ways to spend that output. Bob can spend the money after a day. Alice can spend the money if she has Bob's revocation key. So once Alice has the revocation key, what happens if Bob broadcasts a transaction? He could always broadcast a transaction. He can do that now, because Alice has already signed it, remember? He can broadcast it, but Alice can take the money if she has Bob's revocation key. If she doesn't have Bob's revocation key, Alice can't take the money. Bob gets the money, he just has to wait a day, right? So Bob will when we get to the end of this chain of transactions, Bob can take this transaction and put it on the broadcast it, and then he gets the money. He just has to wait a day. Can't really days with computer. But this requires Alice or her minions to be vigilant, right? Because if Alice has gone on holiday, Bob could broadcast the money, the transaction, and take the money a day later. So if Alice is on holiday, she has to make sure somebody's watching. Stay online. Something has to stay online all the time. Putting this together. So here we go. Alice wants to send 1 Bitcoin to Bob. She's got 10. So she makes a transaction needing both signatures and she signs it. It says Alice gets 9 bitcoins. That's normal. It's what we always do when Alice is sending 1 out of 10 bitcoins to Bob. She makes an output of 9 bitcoins to herself. So obviously it's ordinary. But what does she do with the other bitcoin? The other bitcoin, the one she wants to send to Bob, she says it can be sent in one of 2 ways. It can be spent after the day has elapsed and you're Bob. Or you're Alice and you have the Bob R1 key. In a race, Alice wins. So if Alice has the revocation key, she'll always get the money back. If she hasn't, she won't, and Bob after a day will get the money back. So Bob will only broadcast this transaction if he has not given away his revocation key. Okay? Once Bob has sent Alice his revocation key, he cannot broadcast this transaction. Okay, now, we just decided that Bob can't broadcast that transaction, right? Because if he does, he's going to lose money. Alice also can't broadcast it because Bob hasn't signed it. So once Bob has sent his revocation key to Alice, nobody can sign it. It's a dead transaction, except for possibly it's possible that Bob can broadcast it if he's tricked Alice into not looking, but let's not go into that. Okay, so this is a foundation for a system in which people can move money back and forth, and we'll talk about that. We'll sort of give you a very quick example of that, and it will also lead us to going all through the network. But let's just start with people going back and forth on the same channel. Okay, so we've had one transaction. One transaction we started with Alice having 10 bitcoins and Bob none, and Alice is giving him 1. Now Alice is going to give him another 1. That's not surprise. That's not new to us. We did that already when we had the payment channels, right? So Bob is going to make a new revocation key though, and Alice is going to make a transaction very like the last one. This time Alice gets 8 coins clear rather than 9, and the other 2 get caught in the same either or thing, right? So that Alice can spend them if she's got Bob's revocation key, and Bob can spend them if he waits, right? Okay. So Bob sends Alice the revocation key from the last transaction. Sending the key is called revocation. That is what revocation is. It's not putting it on the blockchain and using the key. It's sending the key, because once you've done that, as I've established, you can no longer use the transaction. It's revoked. Okay, so what happens if Bob broadcasts? We've been through this before. If Bob broadcasts transaction 1, now Alice has the revocation key. You get this race, and Alice can now take that money while Bob is waiting, right? We've seen all this, right? So Bob has to wait a day to get the money. Alice now she's got the revocation key, she doesn't have to wait at all, she can just take the money. So that's the end. Alice gets all the money. So, not great. So Alice uses 2 to get all the money while Bob's waiting around for 1. Right? Okay. So I'm going to have a third transaction which goes in the other direction. Bob's going to give back a coin. So remember the state we're in now, we've had 2 transactions. We started with Alice with 10 and Bob with none. We did 1 transaction which got us to 9 and 1. And then we did the second transaction which got us to 8 and 2. So the state we're in now is Alice has 8 bitcoins and Bob has 2. Now Bob's going to make a transaction to give 1 back. So he needs a revocation key from Alice. Alice makes a revocation key, which we'll call Alice R. Bob gets 1 coin in the clear, because remember we're getting to 1 and 9 now. And there's 9 coins still to play with. Who can get that? Alice can get it up to a day, or Bob can get it if he has Alice's revocation key, exactly what we had before. Now we've revoked. At this point, we've revoked the first two transactions, so they're gone. So this is the only transaction still in play. And it's still in play until Bob gets Alice's revocation key, in which case this one gets revoked, at which time this one gets revoked. Okay, so Alice and Bob can, in theory, set up a channel, say each put in 5 Bitcoins. I say in theory because actually that's not been implemented up to now. All that's been implemented is that one actor can put in all the money. But in theory, both could. They keep the transactions that move the Bitcoins around. So we have 10 Bitcoins in the channel, and it keeps changing who owns which bit of it. And we keep this off the chain until one of them actually wants to spend the output. The Lightning Network, and I'm going to come back in here, the Lightning Network, which we're going to learn about in the next lecture, is a network of a bunch of these channels where you can move money around. Okay, so it's not only you can move back and forth within a channel, you move between channels. So you can get lots of things going on. You can get a whole network of things happening without putting anything in the blockchain. Okie doke. See you at the Lightning Network lecture in just a minute.